Okay, welcome back. I'm Ron with OnPoint, and we're going to continue where we left off and go to the next stage of setting up your flight controller. Alright, last couple of tabs. Next one is safety. And so here it gives you some options what you can have the aircraft do when the battery hits a certain level. So you've got a couple different things you can do. You can tell it to warn you, or you can tell it to land, or you can tell it to return at critical level, land at emergency level. So let's look at what those levels are set. Now I use these, keep these at the default levels. Okay. Warning will only happen if you're using a telemetry with a computer base station. So the telemetry radios, if you notice, you've got one on board the aircraft here. That's that little light that's flashing red and green. And this is this companion radio. Now the way these work is if we plug this in to the laptop, the aircraft will talk to the computer and can do it in the field with just the telemetry radios. Now, right now we've got the USB connected to it, but that's really all there is to it. They'll talk to each other, and you'll know they're talking to each other when you see the lights are flashing back and forth. You're getting a lot more activity, so these two radios are talking to each other. So it's creating a communication link between the drone and the computer ground station. Now we've also got the USB connected, so we've got essentially two communication channels open. But this is to give you a warning should the battery give you low. So the only way you'll get a warning, and it's an audio warning on the computer, is if you have that enabled and you have the telemetry working. If you're just out there in the field with remote control, when you hit 15%, it's not going to tell you anything. The radio's not going to talk to you. Okay, so the fail-safe level, it's set at 7%. I leave it set there. And then the emergency land is at 5%. So if you pull down on these tabs, the bottom one you can select says return at critical, land at emergency, and that's what we recommend you use. That way the aircraft will try to come back. If it can't come back, it will land. The worst you can do with these batteries is to over-discharge them. And so keeping the aircraft flying when it shouldn't be flying you're going to be damaging the battery and putting yourself at risk. So that's the first one we'll set. Now the next gray area, it says object detection. We do not have any object detection hardware on this aircraft, so there's no settings for us there. We just leave it set as disabled. Next is RC loss failure trigger. All right, and when we're talking about RC, we're talking about remote control. That's if you lose communication between the radio and the drone. Now, what can cause that? The malfunction in the radio, most commonly, is if the batteries are too low and it loses signal and you'll lose communication link. If it loses that link, this is what we're telling it to do. We're going to tell it to land. Now, you've got some options. You can disable it. You can tell it to hold. You can tell it to land. You can put it into RC recovery mode, terminate and lockdown. So we tell it to return. We'll let it go. I think the default is 0.5 seconds. So in a half second, if it's not getting communication between the radio and the drone, it is going to turn back in land. So we've got it set here to 1 second, but that's the default is a half second. All right, there's no point in it staying out there flying if it's not communicating. And what it'll do then is just going to stop, turn, come back, and land itself. All right, the next block is called data link loss failsafe. Now, the data link are these radios here. These are the data link radios, telemetry data link radios. Now, generally speaking, we leave that setting as disabled. The reason we do that is if you have your aircraft out flying an autonomous mission, or you're flying it out the remote control, but you still have it connected to the computer, getting that feedback, show the aircraft and where it is as a teaching tool. If you lose data link, you still have control of the aircraft. There's no reason for it to stop and come back. Now, if you're flying it autonomously without a remote control, it's strictly operating off a laptop, and it does lose command link, then you may want to set the command link, set that to where it goes into failsafe. But if you're using the remote control, which really should be the only way you're using it, so you have that backup, you don't really need to use that. So we're going to leave that set at disabled. The next block down is geofence failsafe trigger. Now, this is an important feature to use. When you hit the pull down menu, you've got none, a warning, hold mode, return mode, and terminate. We typically set it at hold mode. If you click the two little check boxes there, you can set a maximum radius and a maximum altitude. All right, and when you set those, you're essentially setting the area where that drone will operate. If it tries to go too high, it'll hit that fence and it won't go past it. If you're setting it at with your distance one set, it'll hit the edge of that and it won't go beyond that. All right. So what we recommend to start off with anyway is setting a radius of about 150 feet. That's about the size of a football field or a soccer field. Okay. It's clearly you'll be able to keep the aircraft in sight at that range, and you'll be able to know where it is. It's a good, safe distance to set them up with at least to start with. You can't legally fly these drones where you can't see them, so setting up that kind of distance is good. And it's great for schools because most of them will fly a drone in a football field or a soccer field. All right? Max altitude. Now, typically we'll set this to start with at about 100 feet. Sometimes when you pull your software up, it may be defaulting into meters. So we'll typically set it at about 50 meters for a max radius and about 30 meters for a max altitude. That's about 100 feet. Now, you can raise that, but you cannot legally fly one of these drones above 400 feet. And you may have airspace restrictions that will require you to keep it even lower than that. You'll need to know all those things. But what we recommend, like I said, typically is started at 100 feet. Right. Next, we have return to launch settings. Now, when we tell it to return, we're going to have a couple things we tell it to do. So first, we have to set the return to launch altitude. So we've got it set at 70 feet. Right? So what that means is if the drone's at 100 feet, it's going to descend to 70 feet. If it's at 50 feet, it's going to climb to 70 feet. Right? Then it's going to turn and it's going to fly back to where it took off from. And you have a couple other settings after that. You can tell it to land immediately. You can tell it to loiter and not to land. So you have to loiter and land after a specific amount of time, and then you can set the time. After a few seconds, a loiter altitude, and you can set a loiter altitude. Now, loiter tends to be used about building a fixed wing an airplane where you're using a Pixhawk's flight controller, and you're going to want it to come and loiter over your takeoff point. And it'll just come up and it'll orbit over the top of it. It's not something you're going to necessarily want to do with a quadcopter. You want it either to come back and land itself, and then you can restart the mission if you have enough battery strength left. So we recommend that you set it to land immediately. The next gray area just has the descent speed. I've got ours set for 2 feet per second. It's a pretty decent speed for it to land. Next one, gray block, is vehicle telemetry logging. I always set that as enabled. It creates flight logs of your flight. Each flight controller has a micro SD card in it, and it records them on there. You can pull that card out, you can upload them to a website, and it will overlay the flight where it was and give you a whole lot of really good information. Okay. And then the last one has to do with hardware in the loop simulation. We're not doing anything with that right now, so we'll just leave that as disabled. Right. The next tab we're going to go to is one that says tuning. Now, this has the ability where you can go in and you can adjust the sliders to set throttle. For the most part, when you want to take off to fly, you want to move that throttle from all the way on the bottom. Once the aircraft is armed, it should start to get light and start to take off when the throttle is at 50%, so right in the middle of the gimbal. All right, I've had aircraft where I have to get it well above that for the aircraft to start to come off the ground. That's either where the aircraft is overloaded or I've got a setting wrong. This is a place where you can make adjustments to do that. If it's coming off the ground really early, the aircraft is very lightweight. You're not getting it up to halfway, the aircraft's coming off the ground. There you may want to slide it and tune it so that it's, to make adjustments so that the aircraft starts to come off the ground when you're at 50% of the throttle. All right? So there's no reason to do anything with these unless you feel like you need to. Next tab is cameras. We have a camera on here, but the camera this is set for is triggering to take still pictures. This is essentially an FPV or a live video camera, so it's not that kind. So if you've got a camera on here and you want to do creating orthomosaic images where you're stitching a lot of pictures together, this is where you can go in and you can tell it to enable, you can tell the trigger interface, and you can also tell it how often you want it to take pictures. All right, but without a camera on here, we're not going to do any setting changes with that. The last tab is parameters. Now, there are a lot of parameters you can go in and make adjustments on. My recommendation is leave the parameter settings as they are. Experiment with the aircraft, see how it flies. If you want to make a setting change, you can do that, but you need to know that you make setting changes into this, it can have a significant impact on how the aircraft maneuvers. So before you start making setting changes on any of these, you're going to want to look up in the forums exactly what these things are and the changes that you need to make in order to make those work. So the most common one that I've seen is just a feature to go in and you can disable the safety switch. All right, I don't necessarily recommend you do that, but you can do that so that then to arm the aircraft, you don't have to come out here and press the button. All you have to do is hit the arm switch and it'll arm and it'll spin up. So that's entirely up to you. There are a lot of other settings in here that you can go in and make changes to. But again, do some reading before you get to that. And that's it. You're ready to take the aircraft outside, put some propellers on it, and take it for its first flight. When you take it off for the first flight, power it up, just get it 5 feet off the ground, 6 feet off the ground, and see how it performs. You want it to be in position mode so it'll hold its position. If you get it a few feet off the ground and it's acting squirrely and something's wrong, put it right back on the ground, bring it inside, take the props off, and take a look and see if there's some setting changes or something you need to do. But that's it. You're ready to give it a try and go flying. So thank you.